Close your eyes for a moment. Let the weight of the day settle into the mattress beneath you and allow yourself to drift somewhere quieter, somewhere older, to the soft green hills of England in the early years of the 19th century, when the world was still full of unanswered questions. It is the winter of 1809. In the small town of Shrewsbury, in a large, comfortable house beside the River Severn, a child is born. His name is Charles Robert Darwin. Outside the windows, the January frost has just given way to February cold, and the bare oak trees stand like patient, silent things along the riverbank. Inside, there is warmth, firelight, the smell of wood smoke and wool blankets, and in the quiet of that house, a life begins that will one day change the way every human being on earth understands the living world around them. But Charles doesn't know any of that yet. He is simply a baby, warm and new, in a house full of books and conversation. His father, Robert Darwin, is a successful doctor, large, prosperous, deeply kind. His grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, was a famous poet and thinker, a man who had already, in his own gentle way, wondered at the origins of life. Charles grows up surrounded by curiosity. It runs in the family like a river through limestone, carving its own quiet channel. As a boy, Charles loves to wander. He collects beetles from beneath fallen logs, pressing them gently between his fingers to study the patterns on their shells. He watches beetles, birds, the sluggish progress of worms through dark earth. He notices things, the way a spider rebuilds its web in exactly the same configuration each morning, the way certain flowers attract certain insects and not others. The world, to young Charles, is not background, it is foreground. It is the main event. His family sends him at 16 to study medicine at the University of Edinburgh. It is a practical choice. Doctors are respected, doctors are secure. But Charles finds the lecture halls stuffy and the surgical demonstrations genuinely distressing. He leaves 2 operations before their completion, unable to watch the suffering without the comfort of modern anesthesia. Medicine is not his path. What does capture him at Edinburgh is the shoreline. There is a man named Robert Grant, a professor, a naturalist, who wades into the tide pools with his sleeves rolled up, pulling apart sea creatures, marvelling at their tiny, intricate organs. Charles joins him. Together they study marine invertebrates, creatures most people never think twice about, sea sponges, whelks, the tiny organisms that drift in the cold grey water of the Scottish coast. Charles is mesmerised. Life, he begins to understand, is everywhere, in forms more strange and various than most people ever pause to notice. His father, gently exasperated, sends him to Cambridge. If not medicine, then the church, a respectable life as a country clergyman perhaps, with time for his nature studies on the side. Charles goes, and he finds Cambridge rather more agreeable than Edinburgh. The old stone buildings, the quiet courtyards where pigeons strut and coo in the morning mist, the libraries with their high windows and their shelves of leather-bound books. He studies theology as required, but mostly he collects beetles. He collects beetles with the intensity of someone who has found religion in a different form. He crawls through hedgerows. He lifts bark from dead trees in the cold dawn. He wades through marshes. He finds a beetle so remarkable one afternoon that, having no free hand to carry it, he places it in his mouth, only to release it moments later when it fires a noxious fluid against his tongue. He laughs about this story for years. At Cambridge, he also discovers geology, the study of the earth itself, its layers and its age. His professor, John Stevens Henslow, becomes a mentor and a friend. Henslow is the kind of teacher who changes lives not through drama, but through steady, genuine encouragement. He sees in Charles something extraordinary, and he nurtures it with patience. It is Henslow who, in the summer of 1831, hands Charles a letter that will alter the course of his life entirely. The British Admiralty is sending a small ship called HMS Beagle on a surveying voyage along the coast of South America. The ship's captain, Robert Fitzroy, is a young man of brilliant and volatile temperament. He does not want to eat his meals alone at the captain's table for what could be years at sea, and he has asked Henslow to recommend a gentleman naturalist who might provide good conversation and keen scientific observation. Henslow thinks of Charles immediately. Charles is 22 years old. He is slight, earnest, with a quietly restless mind. His father is opposed to the voyage. It seems irresponsible, impractical, a waste of good years. But his uncle Josiah Wedgwood argues on his behalf, and his father relents. On a grey December morning in 1831, Charles Darwin walks aboard HMS Beagle, and the little ship slips out of Plymouth harbour and into the open Atlantic. He is immediately, catastrophically seasick. For days he lies in his hammock in the cramped quarters below deck, the timbers of the ship groaning around him, the smell of tar and salt, and close quarters thick in the air. He eats raisins when he can manage anything at all. He wonders in his misery whether this was a terrible mistake. But the seasickness eventually relents, and what follows are 5 years that will quietly, permanently reorder his understanding of the natural world. The Beagle sails south and west, following the long, complicated coastlines of South America. Charles goes ashore at every opportunity, filling notebooks with observations, filling crates with specimens. In Brazil, he walks through rainforest for the first time, and the experience nearly overwhelms him. The sheer abundance of life, the insects, the birds, the plants twisting toward the canopy, the damp, rich smell of decomposing leaves and new growth all at once, fills him with something close to reverence. He writes home. The day has passed delightfully. Delight itself, however, is a weak term to express the feelings of a naturalist who for the first time has wandered by himself in a Brazilian forest. He finds fossils in the cliffs of Patagonia, the bones of creatures vast and strange, armadillo-like animals the size of small cars, enormous ancient ground sloths. He notices something that nags at him quietly, like a splinter beneath the skin. The fossils of these extinct creatures resemble, not exactly, but resemblingly, the living creatures of the same region. Why would that be? Why would the ancient creatures of South America look like modified versions of South America's living animals? He does not yet have an answer, but the question has lodged itself. In the autumn of 1835, the Beagle arrives at a cluster of volcanic islands sitting in the Pacific Ocean, nearly 1,000 miles from the South American coast. The islands are called the Galapagos. They are stark, sun-scorched, extraordinary. Giant tortoises move with geological slowness across black lava fields. Marine iguanas, the only lizards in the world that feed in the sea, drape themselves like shadows over the rocks. Flightless cormorants stand at the water's edge with wings that have forgotten what wings are for. And the birds. Charles collects birds on island after island, small, brown, unremarkable birds, finches mostly. He doesn't pay them much attention at the time, stuffing them into specimen bags with only careless notes about which island each came from. It is only later, back in England, when the ornithologist John Gould examines them, that the truth emerges. These are not several different kinds of birds. These are one kind of bird, diverged into many. Each island has produced its own variation, its beak shaped by the food available there, thick and powerful for crushing seeds on one island, long and delicate for probing flowers on another, the same bird changed by its circumstances, the same ancestor become many things. The splinter sinks deeper. In October 1836, HMS Beagle returns to England. Charles is 27 years old and has been away for 5 years. He is thinner, a little weather-beaten, and profoundly, permanently different. He steps ashore and goes home to Shrewsbury, and his family gathers around him in the firelit parlour, and he is home. But his mind is still moving, still out there in the Galapagos, still watching those birds. Over the months that follow, he settles into the work of cataloguing his specimens and writing up his findings. He moves to London, then eventually to a house called Down House in the Kentish countryside, a quiet, comfortable place with a garden he will tend devotedly for the rest of his life. He marries his cousin Emma Wedgwood, a warm and intelligent woman who loves him steadily and argues with him about God with equal steadiness. They are well matched, they are happy, and in the evenings after dinner, after the children are in bed, they will have 10 children, and Charles is a tender, attentive father, the kind who gets down on the floor to play. He thinks. He reads. He makes notes in his private journal that no one else is meant to see. In 1838, he reads an essay by an economist named Thomas Malthus, a cold, clear argument about populations and resources, about how all creatures produce more offspring than can possibly survive. And something shifts in Darwin's thinking, like a key turning in a lock. If more are born than can survive, then there must be competition. And if there is competition, then any variation that gives an individual a slight advantage, a slightly better beak, a slightly thicker coat, a slightly stronger immune system, that individual is more likely to survive, to reproduce, to pass on that variation to its children. And over generations, over thousands and thousands of generations, those small advantages accumulate, creatures change, populations transform. One thing slowly, over immense stretches of time, becomes another. He calls this natural selection, and he knows, with quiet certainty, that it is the engine of everything. But he does not publish, not yet. He is a methodical man, a careful man, and he understands how large a claim this is. He needs more evidence. He spends years studying barnacles, those small encrusting creatures that cover rocks and ships' hulls, investigating them with the same gentle intensity he once gave to tide pools in Edinburgh. He publishes on barnacles. He publishes on coral reefs, having solved the long-standing puzzle of how those great circular reefs form in the open ocean. He is building a reputation, carefully, stone by stone, so that when the great theory finally arrives, it will stand on solid ground. The years pass, the children grow, the garden at Down House is tended, and Charles works, always works, in his study lined with books and specimens, his thinking slow and deep and sure. Then, in June of 1858, a letter arrives. It comes from a young naturalist named Alfred Russel Wallace, who has been working in the jungles of the Malay archipelago, collecting and observing with the same tireless devotion as Darwin had once brought to the Galapagos. Enclosed with the letter is an essay. Darwin opens it and begins to read. And as he reads, a feeling he will later describe as a kind of stunned astonishment settles over him. Wallace has arrived independently at the same theory. Natural selection. The survival of those best suited to their environment. The gradual transformation of species over time. Everything Darwin has spent 20 years quietly building in his notebooks, Wallace has found it too in the humid heat of Southeast Asia on his own. Darwin is devastated, then magnanimous, then practical. With the encouragement of his friends and colleagues, both his work and Wallace's essay are presented together simultaneously to the Linnaean Society of London in July 1858. The theory belongs to both men. History, somewhat unjustly, will give Darwin the lion's share of the credit, largely because the following year, in 1859, he publishes the book he has been slowly writing for so long. On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection is not a difficult book. It reads like a long, thoughtful letter from a man who has spent his life paying attention. Darwin's prose is careful, earnest, full of examples, pigeons and primroses, orchids and earthworms, the shells of ancient creatures preserved in chalk cliffs. He makes his case the way a good teacher makes a case, patiently, thoroughly, with genuine delight in the subject. The world receives it with a mixture of wonder, argument, controversy, and eventual deep understanding. Some are offended by its implications, that humans too are part of this ancient branching tree of life, that we share ancestry with every creature that has ever lived. Some are thrilled. The arguments rage in drawing rooms and universities and churches. Thomas Huxley, Darwin's fierce and brilliant ally, debates the Bishop of Oxford and makes the case for evolution with such force that the room erupts. Darwin himself stays at Down House unwell and exhausted, tending his garden. He publishes more. He studies orchids. He studies the expressions of emotion in animals and humans, noticing that a dog's guilty crouch and a human being's ashamed glance arise from the same deep evolutionary heritage. He writes about earthworms, those humble, tireless creatures who have been quietly rebuilding the soil of the earth for millions of years, churning through every fallen leaf, every dead thing, every grain of dark earth. It is one of his most tender books, a celebration of the small, the slow, the overlooked. He becomes old, slowly, with the gentle inevitability of all living things. His hair and beard go white. His health, never robust, grows more fragile. But he works until nearly the end, moving slowly through his garden, bending to examine a plant, watching a bee move from flower to flower with that ancient, unwitting precision. He dies in April of 1882 at Down House in the company of his family. He is 73 years old. Emma is at his side. His friends and colleagues, the scientists, the thinkers, the people who understood what he had done, petition the government. And on a quiet spring day, Charles Darwin is buried in Westminster Abbey, not far from Isaac Newton.
The greatest explainer of life, laid to rest in one of the grandest human-made spaces on earth. On the banknotes of England for years, his face will look out from beside a hummingbird and a ship. Cities on the other side of the world will be named for him. Species of plants and animals and geological formations will carry his name. A college at Cambridge, a medal given annually in his honour and Wallace's honour together. A bronze statue in Washington seated on a bench, a notebook in his hands, his famous sketch of a branching tree of life open on the page. But the truest monument to Charles Darwin is not in stone or paper or precious metal. It is in the understanding itself. It is in the knowledge, now so deeply embedded in science that it has become the foundation of all biology, that every living thing on this earth, every beetle and barnacle, every orchid and earthworm, every bird with its particular beak, every sleeping child in every warm bed, is connected. All of us part of one enormous branching ancient family, all of us descended by long and winding roads from the same first trembling spark of life. Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution, and that light was kindled carefully and patiently by a quiet man in a garden in Kent who loved beetles and barnacles and earthworms, and who spent his life paying extraordinary attention to the small, ordinary, miraculous things of this world. Rest now. Let the branching tree of life spread wide above you, its leaves whispering in whatever wind moves through your dreams. You are a part of it too, every cell of you shaped by that same long, slow, patient story, and the story is still going, quietly, while you sleep.